The sea remembers the sound of every child who ever dreamed of freedom. It remembers the cries of those who were never allowed to dream. In another life, the boy who would become the sun was born beneath the shadow of the world government, not in the warmth of Fuchsia village, but in the cold marble halls of Marijois, where freedom was a word whispered like heresy. There, amid the blinding gold and white stone, a child with a name that should have belonged to the sea grew up behind glass. They called him Project Dawn. They said he would be the symbol of perfect justice. Yet even the sun, caged, yearns to burn. Before we set sail across this altered sea of fate, join our voyage, so these stories of what might have been are never lost to time. The sun rose slowly over Marijois, gilding the marble palaces in light too clean to be real. The Holy Land floated like a mirage above the red line, detached from the sea's song below. Here the wind did not carry the scent of salt or freedom, only the sterile perfume of lilies and law. And within this illusion of perfection, behind walls of glass and silence, a child was born whose very blood defied the heavens. He was small, quiet, and smiling. The nurses whispered about his eyes, wide, bright, untamed, as though some old god had misplaced a spark inside him. The celestial dragons called him the perfect vessel. They said he would bring legitimacy to the age of divine order. They said he would be proof that even chaos could be tamed. But the boy's laughter, even then, sounded like the ocean. They named him Lucius D. Luffy, though only one of those names was ever spoken aloud. Lucius, they'd say, in soft tones meant to sound loving, but not too human. The other, the name hidden in archives buried beneath cipher pole records, was a ghost that drifted through whispers. Monkey D, the elders muttered, a cursed lineage. But Emu had decreed the boy would live, not as a pirate, not as a rebel, as an instrument of purity. The sun rewritten. When he was old enough to walk, they dressed him in white. White gloves, white shoes, a little white coat lined with gold thread, the color of holiness, the color of chains. And they taught him to bow when a celestial dragon passed. They taught him the difference between justice and freedom, though the words tasted the same to him then, both strange, both forbidden, both too large for a child's tongue. But sometimes, when the tutors turned away, the boy pressed his small hands against the glass of his room's high window and stared at the world below. He could see the horizon, a thin blue line that glimmered like a secret. He would watch birds disappear into it and wonder why they never returned. He asked once, "What's beyond the blue?" The woman in white hesitated. "Only danger, my prince. The world below is chaos." Luffy frowned. "Then why do I dream of it?" She did not answer. The years passed, and the cage grew larger, but no freer. He was educated in the doctrines of the Tenryubito, that some are born to rule, others to serve, and that the greatest virtue was obedience. Yet, in the quiet corners of his mind, the sea kept whispering. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he saw flashes, a straw hat swaying in sunlight, a laugh that felt like home, a promise made to no one. The doctors said the dreams were remnants of his unholy heritage. They ordered treatments, long hours in silver chambers filled with light meant to purify. Luffy would sit quietly as the hum filled his ears, his shadow trembling on the wall. "We're cleansing you of the old will," they'd tell him. "We're making you whole." But even as he nodded, his smile never dimmed. Because deep down, even if he couldn't name it, he knew something unbreakable lived inside him, something older than the world that caged him. One day, he found an old janitor cleaning the marble steps near the main garden. The man was frail, with gray hair tied back and a limp in his leg. Luffy, curious, followed him for days, watching the rhythm of broom and dustpan like a kind of music. Finally, the boy spoke. "Old man," he asked, "why do you look at the sky when you sweep?" The janitor smiled without turning. "Because the sky reminds me I'm not dead yet." That night, Luffy couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling that strange pulse again, like the world itself was calling through his veins. And when he finally drifted into dreams, he saw waves crashing against red cliffs and a ship with a jolly skull flag sailing beneath a golden sun. He woke with tears on his cheeks and didn't know why. By age 12, he had learned the names of every admiral, every cipher pole division, every law written by the world government. They called him a prodigy, not because he was obedient, but because he was curious. Too curious. Once, during a history lesson, he asked, "What's the void century?" The instructor froze. "That question is forbidden." "Why?" "Because there's nothing there." Luffy smiled. "If there's nothing, why forbid it?" He was struck across the face for that. The mark stayed for days. But so did the smile. In the corridors of Marijuai, even the silence began to fear him. There was something unsettling about a child who laughed at punishment, who looked at gilded cages and saw not beauty, but bars. Cipherpole agents reported unease. Subject displays unpredictable empathy patterns, shows compassion toward lower staff, requests to visit the surface world, suggest behavioral correction. Emu read the report in silence, then, with a single stroke of a pen, decreed, "Let the boy serve justice directly. Perhaps it will shape him."
And so, the experiment was set into motion. On the day he was taken to the lower levels, the air was heavy with cloud and ceremony. Marines in white uniforms lined the grand staircase. The 5 elders stood in solemn formation, their robes whispering across the marble like the sound of dying waves. Luffy, now tall for his age but still wearing that same white coat, approached the throne of light. The Grand Elder spoke first. "Lucius D. Luffy," he said, his voice echoing like judgment itself, "you are chosen to embody the purest justice of the new age. You will train under the tutelage of the Marine Admirals. You will cleanse the world of corruption." Luffy looked up. "And what if the corruption comes from here?" The hall fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. One of the guards moved to strike him, but the elder raised a hand. "The child speaks without understanding," he said, but his eyes, old and cold, lingered too long. Luffy didn't lower his gaze. Justice without freedom isn't justice at all. A murmur swept through the chamber like a wave striking stone, and for the first time in that sacred hall, someone smiled. Faint, almost imperceptible, a vice admiral standing near the back, her hands trembling. Later, when no one was watching, she whispered to him, "You remind me of someone, a man who once said the same words before they hanged him. Who was he?" She hesitated. "They called him Roger." That night, Luffy dreamed again. He stood on a cliff overlooking a storming sea. A voice deep, laughing, kind, spoke beside him. "The world will always try to bind you, boy, but the sea remembers who you are." When he turned, there was no one there, only a hat drifting in the wind and the faint echo of freedom. He awoke with his hand reaching upward, as if trying to catch sunlight that wasn't there. And for the first time, the walls of Marijuai felt smaller than ever. Weeks passed, and the holy city prepared to send its golden child into the ranks of justice. The Cypher Paul agents, ever watchful, monitored every heartbeat, every hesitation. Yet behind the cold reports and immaculate posture, something unpredictable was blooming, a question too dangerous to speak aloud. They called it the spark. Luffy called it the ache. It was the feeling that came when he watched the horizon at dusk, the ache that whispered of waves, of laughter, of something wild and kind just beyond his reach. It filled him with a longing he could neither name nor kill. And though his instructors mistook his silence for discipline, the truth was simpler. The boy was listening to something vast. The day he was finally granted leave from his glass confinement, the guards escorted him through the lower levels of Marija's, a place the nobles pretended didn't exist. Here, slaves in chains cleaned the marble that the gods walked on. They did not look up, they had forgotten how. But one of them did. A young woman with sunburned skin and eyes the color of old amber looked at him as he passed, not in fear, in recognition. "You," she whispered. The guard struck her across the mouth. Silence. But before she fell, Luffy's hand caught the man's wrist. It wasn't strength that stopped the blow. It was something deeper, a pulse, an intent. The guard froze, his vision blurred. For a single instant, the world seemed to bend around the boy, like gravity itself had forgotten its duty. Haki, not trained, not conscious, but born. "Don't hurt her," Luffy said quietly. The guard stepped back, trembling. The air stilled. The woman looked up at him again, her lips bleeding, but her gaze full of light. "You've got it," she murmured. "The same fire." "What fire?" "The one they can't put out." He didn't understand. But later that night, her words would echo through his mind, mingling with the waves he'd never touched. They sent him to the Marine headquarters soon after, under the personal supervision of Fleet Admiral Sengoku. The journey down the Red Line was his first time seeing the ocean up close. As the transport vessel sliced through the clouds, Luffy pressed his face to the glass, wide-eyed. "It's so big," he breathed, "like it could swallow the world." Sengoku's voice was calm. "It nearly has, many times. That's why we guard against it." Luffy turned to him. "Do you guard the world, or the truth?" The Admiral frowned, caught off guard by the simplicity of the question. He looked away, saying nothing. When they landed at Marineford, Luffy was greeted by order, ships aligned like soldiers, flags snapping in perfect rhythm, rows of recruits saluting under the sun. It should have been inspiring. Instead, it felt hollow, like a stage dressed in white. And yet, among them, he found one man who didn't fit the pattern. Vice Admiral Garp. He was loud, careless, and laughed like thunder. He had been summoned by the Gorosei to observe the boy's conditioning. But the moment his eyes fell on Luffy, something inside him cracked. The resemblance was undeniable. The eyes, the grin, the way the boy tilted his head when curious, all reflections of a memory Garp had spent years burying beneath rank and reason. "Name!" he barked, masking emotion under authority. "Lucius," the boy replied. "But they say I had another once." Garp's heart lurched. "What was it?" He smiled. "They won't tell me."
For a long moment, the old Marine said nothing. Then he turned away, his laugh echoing through the training yard. "Doesn't matter what they call you, brat. What matters is what you call yourself." Luffy blinked. "Then I choose Luffy." And Garp's laughter broke into something else, something rougher, quieter. "Of course you do." Under Garp's loose supervision, the boy grew stronger. The Marines saw him as a prodigy, mastering Rokushiki techniques faster than any before him, showing uncanny instincts in battle. But Garp saw something deeper, a heart too wild for control. During sparring sessions, Luffy refused to fight to win. He fought to protect. When fellow cadets were injured, he'd stop mid-combat to carry them to safety, ignoring commands. Justice means nothing, he once told his instructor, if you forget what you're fighting for. The phrase spread through the barracks like wildfire. Some admired him, others feared him, but none could ignore him. At night, Garp would find him sitting on the docks, staring at the horizon, the wind tugging at his hair. "What are you looking at, brat?" "The sea," Luffy said softly. "It feels like it's waiting for me." Garp's jaw tightened. "Careful with that kind of talk. The world's not kind to dreamers." "Then I'll be kind to it," Luffy replied with a grin. The old Marine laughed, but there was sorrow behind it. He knew the boy was destined to break his chains one way or another. One morning, Luffy was summoned back to Maria Jos. The elders had requested his presence. When he entered the chamber, the five sat in silence, as if carved from the same stone that built their throne. Imu was there too, a shadow behind the veil of sunlight, presence unseen yet felt like the pressure of the deep sea. "Lucius," one elder began, "we hear troubling reports. Your methods diverge from protocol."
"I saved people," Luffy said. "Isn't that justice?" "Justice," another whispered, "is not mercy. It is order. You were not made to question it." He looked up at them, eyes like twin suns behind clouds. "Then maybe you made me wrong." The silence that followed felt eternal. For the first time in that sacred chamber, the elders did not speak. It was Imu who did, voice soft, like silk drawn across a blade. "Tell me, child, why do you smile even now?" "Because I'm still alive." The shadow paused. "You think life is freedom. I think life wants to be." Something ancient stirred behind that veil of light. For a fleeting heartbeat, Imu, ruler of the world, saw not a child, but a storm, a ripple that might one day drown the gods. That night, they confined him again. His cell was cleaner than most men's homes, his food prepared by royal chefs. But the air was different, heavier, colder. He could feel eyes watching from beyond the walls. He could hear the sea roaring somewhere far below, muffled but insistent. He pressed his palm against the glass, and for the first time in his life, he whispered, "If you can hear me, show me the way." And from the horizon, faint, impossible, came an answering echo, the distant call of a ship's bell carried by the wind across half the world. He smiled. The sea had answered. Morning came draped in the quiet gold of false peace. Marijois shimmered as always, perfect, eternal, untouched by the world below. Yet within its heart, in a room of glass and silence, a boy sat awake with eyes that no longer belonged to this place. Something inside him had changed. The waves that had haunted his dreams were no longer dreams. They were memories, fragments of a destiny that had been stolen, now stirring back to life. The guards arrived to escort him for evaluation, but Luffy didn't move. He sat cross-legged on the floor, gazing at the sunlight breaking through the high windows. "Stand," one of them ordered. Luffy smiled softly. "Do you ever wonder what it feels like to fall?" The man frowned. "Fall? From up here, from this place. Would you hit the sea, or would it touch you?" The guard hesitated, uncertain whether to answer. Before he could speak, the boy's gaze lifted toward the sky, as if he could see something beyond the glass, beyond the clouds, beyond even the light. "I think," Luffy said, his voice barely more than a whisper, "the sea catches everyone, eventually." That afternoon, Cipher Pole took him for examination, a routine mental assessment meant to measure loyalty and compliance. The room was white, the air sharp with sterilized calm. Electrodes hummed quietly. Across the table sat a man with silver hair and eyes like steel, the director of CP0. Lucius, tell me what justice means to you. Luffy tilted his head. Justice means not being afraid. Afraid of what? Of yourself. The man scribbled something down. And what of the government? Do you trust it? I trust people, but I haven't met many here. For the first time, the director's pen paused. His eyes narrowed. Do you consider yourself one of us?
Luffy looked thoughtful. You mean one of the good ones? The silence that followed was suffocating. Then the man smiled thinly and closed his book. You'll serve your purpose soon enough. But when he left, he didn't notice the faint scorch mark beneath the boy's handprint on the table, as if his will alone had burned through the steel. That night, he escaped. It wasn't planned. It wasn't clever. It was inevitable. He didn't run for power or rebellion. He ran because the sea had called again, louder this time, as if the whole world below was breathing his name. The locks on his chamber door rusted without touch. The guards who stood watch fell into sudden sleep. And as he walked through the marble corridors, barefoot and silent, the torches flickered one by one, bowing as he passed. At the edge of Marijois, he found the balcony that overlooked the red line. The wind howled, carrying salt from miles below. There was no ship, no rope, no plan, only the horizon, endless, merciless, beautiful. He stepped onto the ledge, and in that moment, something strange happened. The clouds parted. A single ray of sunlight fell upon him, breaking through the holy city's eternal veil. Somewhere deep within the earth, a current stirred. The same current that once carried the ships of ancient kings, the same rhythm that guided the D lineage through centuries of silence. Luffy closed his eyes. Then he jumped. He fell for what felt like an eternity. Wind roared past him, tearing through the fabric of his white uniform, scattering it like feathers. For a moment, there was no up or down, only the taste of freedom. He didn't scream. He laughed. The sea below rose to meet him, blue and infinite. But before he struck the waves, something massive broke the surface. A giant bubble of air, a shimmer of gold beneath the sun. The boy landed inside it, cushioned by the breath of the world itself. When the bubble burst, he found himself floating on driftwood, coughing, laughing, alive. The red line loomed behind him like a fading nightmare. Ahead, nothing but open sea. The ocean whispered, "Welcome home." Days passed as he drifted. He learned the hunger of the waves, the chill of the night wind, the taste of salt on cracked lips. Yet through it all, he smiled. Each sunrise felt like a heartbeat, each gull's cry like a song he'd always known. He didn't know where he was going, only that he was going somewhere free. Then, one evening, as the horizon bled red and gold, he saw it, a ship approaching, sails marked with the insignia of the Marines. He could have hidden. He didn't. When they pulled him aboard, drenched and sunburned, a familiar laugh shook the deck. "Ha! I knew it'd be you, brat!" Luffy blinked up through dripping hair. "Old man?" Garp crouched beside him, eyes twinkling, though lined with worry. "You're not supposed to be out here, kid. You know what this means, right? They'll come after you."
Luffy grinned. Let him. Garp sighed, scratching his beard. You got no idea what kind of storm you're calling down. Then it's my storm. For a moment, the sea was silent. Then Garp threw back his head and laughed. You really are your father's son. My father? The old Marine hesitated, then shook his head. You'll find out soon enough. He tossed the boy a small bundle. Inside was a tattered piece of cloth, the corner of a once bright flag, marked with a skull wearing a straw hat. Keep that, Garp said quietly. It belonged to someone who changed the world. Luffy stared at it, fingers trembling. The fabric smelled faintly of sun and salt, and something like home. He smiled. I'll change it too. That night, as Garp's ship cut through the moonlit waters, the boy stood at the bow, hair whipping in the wind. Above him, the stars shimmered like endless possibilities. Below, the sea hummed softly. A mother's lullaby for a child returned. He didn't yet know what fate awaited him, the wars, the betrayals, the miracles. But for now, he was no longer the boy in the ivory cage. He was a flame, reborn in salt and sky. And somewhere far away, in the darkened halls of Mauresia, Emu watched the ocean and whispered, almost tenderly, So, the sun escapes its cage. The shadow smiled. Then let the heavens prepare to burn. The sea carried him to destiny, like a secret letter sealed by the sun. Months passed since the boy's fall from the heavens, and though the world government buried his disappearance beneath layers of silence, the ocean remembered. Whispers spread across the Grand Line. Tales of a young Marine who laughed in the face of orders, who shielded slaves from the lash, who questioned justice itself. They called him the Dawn Recruit. None knew his true name, but all who met him said the same. His smile made the world feel lighter, even when it shouldn't. Now that same boy stood beneath the white banners of Marineford, the wind tugging at his coat. The symbol of justice gleamed across his back, heavy, radiant, false. Lucius D. Luffy, the announcer's voice boomed across the courtyard, promoted to Lieutenant of the Marines for exemplary conduct and victory in the East Blue Campaign. The crowd cheered, cannons roared in salute, but Luffy didn't feel pride. He felt hollow. Every medal, every bow, every command felt like a mask pressed tighter against his face. He had led his first mission, a raid on a pirate stronghold. The orders were simple: subdue all, burn the rest. But when he saw the villagers, the terrified children chained beside the plunder, he couldn't obey. He broke ranks, freed them all. And when the report reached the elders, the council debated his fate. Execution was proposed. Emu refused. The boy is still useful, the unseen voice had said. Even the sun casts light upon our stage before it burns. Thus, instead of death, Luffy was rewarded, a medal of justice for an act of defiance, a golden lie for a silver truth. The days that followed were quiet but uneasy. His comrades admired him, but with distance, as one admires a storm from the shore. His name carried weight, but no trust. They called him lucky, strange, cursed. Among them was a young Marine captain named Tashigi, serious, idealistic, still believing that justice could be pure. She saw in him something she didn't understand. "Why do you disobey?" she asked one evening, watching him sit on the railing overlooking the harbor. He shrugged. "Because sometimes orders are wrong." She frowned. "You're a soldier. You don't get to decide what's right." "Maybe not, but I get to decide what feels right." Tashigi sighed. "You'll get yourself killed. Then I'll die smiling." She turned away, frustrated, but couldn't shake the strange warmth in his words.
There was something reckless, almost sacred, about the way he believed in the goodness of the world, even when the world didn't deserve it. News spread fast across the seas that year. Pirates grew bolder, the revolutionaries moved in shadows, and rumors whispered that the government was building something new, an army of purity, forged in the image of their perfect marine, Project Dawn. They called it Justice Absolute, a doctrine built upon the symbol of the boy who had once been their experiment. His likeness was carved into statues across Marijois, a saint of obedience, a mask of everything he had refused to become. When Luffy saw one of those statues in a port city, his laughter broke the silence of the square. "Guess they finally made me behave." The people nearby didn't laugh. They bowed. He stopped smiling. That night, he broke the statue's face and left without a sound. The Grand Line stretched before him like a question without an answer. Luffy spent months patrolling its chaos, saving more than he was ordered to, questioning everything he was told. His superiors called it recklessness. His subordinates called it kindness. He called it breathing. One mission took him to a nameless island, one of those forgotten by maps but remembered by graves. The government had ordered an evacuation. Pirates had taken refuge there, and justice demanded cleansing. But when Luffy arrived, he found not pirates, but survivors, former slaves, refugees, the broken remnants of a dream called freedom. Among them stood a man with tattoos curling across his arms like storms. He looked up from repairing a broken mast and smiled. "You're not like the others. You got the sea in your eyes." Luffy tilted his head. "You know me?"
"Not yet," the man replied. "Name's Fisher Tiger." Luffy blinked. "You're supposed to be dead." Tiger laughed. "So are you, if the government's right." They talked for hours, of the world above, of Marijois, of chains and choices. Tiger spoke of his hatred for the celestial dragons, his rebellion, his fall. Luffy listened in silence, hands trembling. "They said justice is balance," Tiger murmured, "but when the scales are made of gold and blood, there's no balance left." Luffy looked at him, eyes steady. "Then maybe justice isn't something we weigh. Maybe it's something we live." The fishman smiled, weary and wise. "You sound like someone who hasn't lost everything yet." "Not yet," Luffy said quietly, "but I will." And in that moment, Fisher Tiger saw what few ever did, the weight of prophecy behind a boy's grin. When dawn came, marine ships appeared on the horizon, sails gleaming like knives. Orders came through. Eliminate all hostiles. Retrieve the traitor if possible. Luffy's hand tightened on his blade. Tiger looked at him calmly. "Well, boy, seems your justice and mine are about to meet." The cannons fired. Explosions bloomed across the shore, waves screaming as they split. Smoke swallowed the sunlight. And in the chaos, Luffy moved, faster than sight, faster than thought. He cut down the chains meant for the innocent, redirected cannon fire with bare fists, shouting over the roar, "Run! The sea's waiting!" But the Marines hesitated. They saw their lieutenant, their hero, fighting against them. "Luffy!" Toshigi's voice tore through the smoke. "Stop! You're attacking your own men!"
He turned, eyes blazing, and for the first time she saw something ancient within them. Not rebellion, but mercy sharpened into fury. "They're not our enemy," he shouted. "They're just people who want to live." "Then who's the enemy?" He paused. In the distance, through smoke and flame, he saw the flags of the celestial dragons fluttering on the lead ship, white on gold, shining like hypocrisy itself. "The ones who fear the sea," he said. By the time the sun set, the island was gone, swallowed by smoke and silence. Fisher Tiger had vanished into the waves, wounded but free. The Marines retreated with shame.
and Luffy, standing alone amid the wreckage, stared at the justice emblem on his sleeve. He tore it off. The sea breeze caught it, carried it upward, and for a fleeting instant, the fabric looked like a flag of rebellion. He didn't know yet what that meant. He only knew that justice, true justice, had nothing to do with power. It had to do with choice. He turned toward the horizon. Somewhere, far away, the world's eyes were already turning toward him. The boy in white who defied the gods, the Marine who smiled as the world burned its illusions. The world, as always, pretended not to see. The world government rewrote the story of that island before the ashes cooled. The reports read, "Pirate uprising successfully suppressed under Lieutenant Lucius D. Luffy's command. Fisher Tiger confirmed deceased. No civilian casualties." A perfect victory. A perfect lie. Luffy's face was printed across the Marine Gazette, a hero of justice. The paper called him the beacon of the new era. And yet, as he read those words, the laughter that broke from him sounded nothing like joy. Each word, each false praise, was another chain. The same gold cage, just painted brighter.
That night, in the silence of his quarters, he burned the paper. He watched his own image curl into ash. He whispered, "They'll call anything justice if it keeps the throne standing." The next morning, Sengoku summoned him. The fleet admiral's office was vast and still. Walls lined with history, portraits of heroes whose eyes no longer remembered why they fought. The air smelled faintly of ink and salt. "Lieutenant," Sengoku said quietly, "the elders are watching you closely. They believe your impulsiveness can still be shaped." Luffy tilted his head. "Into what?" "A symbol," Sengoku replied. "One the world can believe in." Luffy smiled. "A symbol doesn't believe back." Sengoku sighed, heavy with the weight of knowing too much. "You think I don't understand, boy? I do. But the world isn't changed by defiance. It's changed by endurance." "Then maybe the world's waited too long." For a moment, the old admiral saw it, that same glint in Luffy's eyes that once burned in Roger's, the light that refused to bow. It frightened him, not because it was dangerous, but because it was true. "Go," he said finally. "Take a leave of duty. See the seas. Find your clarity before they take it from you." Luffy nodded. "I already have, sir." When he left the office, Sengoku stared at the door long after it closed. Just like him. Just like that damn D. Luffy's journey carried him through the blues again, east, west, and back to the Grand Line. Everywhere he went, he saw stories that the world government refused to tell. Villages burned in the name of order, oceans choked with the wreckage of justice. Yet amid the ruin, he also saw laughter, pirates helping fishermen rebuild their homes, children waving to passing ships with wooden swords held high. The world was never simple, and that truth, to him, was beautiful. On one such island, he found a tavern at the edge of the sea, weathered wood, dim light, the smell of rum and salt. Inside sat a man with crimson hair and a scar that smiled before he did. "Didn't expect to see a Marine here," Shanks said, raising his glass. Luffy stopped in the doorway. The sight of that straw hat, the straw hat, struck him like a forgotten heartbeat. "Nice hat," he said. Shanks grinned. "Got it from a friend. Why, you want it?" Luffy shook his head. "No, I think it already belongs to me in another life." The pirate's laughter filled the tavern like a tide. "You've got that look in your eyes, the one that says you're about to cause trouble for everyone, including yourself." "Maybe," Luffy said, "but I just want to see how far the sea goes." "Then you're not a Marine," Shanks said softly. "Not really."
Luffy leaned on the bar. You think being a pirate's any different? Shanks smiled into his drink. Maybe not. Maybe we're just both fools chasing the same dream with different names. The two talked until dawn, of freedom, of fate, of the weight of the world. Shanks never asked where the boy came from. He didn't need to. The sea already knew. When morning came, Luffy rose to leave. Hey, Shanks called, tossing him a small trinket, a broken compass wrapped in string. The log post doesn't point where you think, but sometimes that's the point. Luffy caught it, smiled, and tucked it into his pocket. Thanks. Maybe I'll see you at the end of the world. Shanks grinned. Maybe you'll be the end of the world. Not long after, word reached the Marines of a massacre at Eni's lobby. Ships burned, records erased, and a cipher pole base destroyed. The government called it an act of piracy, but the whispers told another tale. A ghost had done it. A figure in a white coat with no flag, no orders, and no mercy for the ones who enslaved truth. The description matched only one man. The elders met in silence. He's gone rogue, said one. He's fulfilling his nature, said another. Emu's voice, soft and distant, ended the debate. Let him roam. Even the sun sets when it grows tired, and when it does, we'll be waiting. Meanwhile, on the open sea, Luffy's ship drifted through a storm. Lightning cracked like divine judgment, and the rain hammered against the deck. He stood at the helm, soaked to the bone, laughing like the storm itself had become his mirror. Every wave that struck him felt like a question. What are you? Pirate? Marine? God's mistake? He shouted into the wind, I'm none of them. Thunder answered, rolling like applause. He raised his hand, and for the first time he felt it. Not hockey, not power, but something purer. Will. The storm bent around him, not in obedience but recognition. He closed his eyes, feeling the pulse of the world beneath his feet. The sea no longer spoke in whispers, it roared. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the ship adrift under a sky of silver clouds. Luffy stood at the bow, staring into the horizon where the sun broke through, radiant, wild, unchained. He smiled, eyes burning with the reflection of dawn. He knew what he had to do. Not destroy justice, redefine it. Not burn the world, wake it. And somewhere, far beyond the waves, a revolutionary army stirred, drawn by whispers of a marine who fought for slaves, who laughed in the face of gods, who bore the cursed name the world tried to erase, the name of D. The world was beginning to remember his name, not the one carved in gold by the world government, but the one the sea had kept safe all along. Monkey D. Luffy. The rumor spread faster than ships could sail. They said a marine had turned traitor, that he'd freed prisoners from Impel Down, that he'd sunk warships flying the celestial dragon seal. None of it was entirely true, yet none of it was entirely false. The truth was simpler. Everywhere injustice appeared, the boy in white followed, laughing, fighting, freeing, and vanishing with the tide. He became myth. In the high chambers of Maria Joie, the 5 elders sat in a circle of unease. The boy undermines order across the blues. Every attempt to contain him fails. Even Cipher Pole refuses assignments against him now. They call him the Laughing Dawn, another added, voice low. Even pirates salute him. Then we shall make him a devil, said the third. Brand him as heretic, enemy of peace. Emu's voice slid through the air like the hiss
of a tide against bone. "No," it whispered, "not yet. Let him grow. The light must burn brightest before it shatters." The others bowed their heads. In the glow of the throne's endless light, the shadow smiled. Luffy didn't know the gods were watching. He didn't care. He found a rhythm in rebellion, not hatred, but liberation. He fought Marines who followed cruel orders, then carried the wounded to safety afterward. He stole food from nobles to feed the poor. He sunk ships carrying slaves bound for the Holy Land.
The people didn't see a Marine or a pirate. They saw something else. They saw hope. In a village on the Grand Line, a child once tugged at his sleeve and asked, "Mister, are you the sun?" He laughed. "Nah, I'm just the idiot who keeps chasing it." The child smiled, holding up a tiny drawing, a stick figure grinning beneath a big round sun. Luffy kept that paper, folded it into his coat. But the higher he climbed in legend, the deeper his loneliness grew. He began to see faces in dreams, a red-haired man with a straw hat, a woman with orange hair, a swordsman with green blades, a reindeer who smiled. People he'd never met, yet somehow loved. He'd wake in the middle of the night, hand reaching out into darkness, whispering names that never made it past his lips. Zoro, Sanji, Nami. Ghosts of another fate, another life. The sea had stolen his freedom once. Now it gave him memories that didn't belong to this world. Sometimes he wondered if the ocean itself was remembering. It was during one of these restless nights that the revolutionaries found him. The meeting took place on a drifting island cloaked in mist, a place that didn't exist on any map. Torches flickered between old ruins, and the scent of salt and rebellion hung thick in the air. When he arrived, a dozen cloaked figures waited in silence. At their center stood a man with iron eyes and a scar across his jaw. Dragon. "You've caused quite a storm," Dragon said. His voice calm but weighted.
Luffy tilted his head. "Storms don't mean to. You fight for the same things we do." "Maybe," Luffy said, "but I'm not part of your army." Dragon smiled faintly. "No one said you had to be. The world needs symbols. The people believe in you." "I don't want them to," Luffy replied. "Belief turns to chains. I just want them to move." Dragon studied him, silent for a long while. "You speak like someone who's seen the gods." Luffy looked toward the sea. "I was raised by them." A ripple of shock passed through the crowd, but Dragon only nodded. He understood the tone, not pride, not bitterness, but truth. "Then you know what must come next." Luffy turned to him. "A war?" Dragon's eyes glinted. "A dawn." In the months that followed, the world trembled. Marines defected. Pirates united under banners of shared cause. The revolutionaries struck harder, faster, deeper. And always, always, wherever hope flared, there was Luffy. The boy in the white coat became the face of a movement that had no leader, no laws, only laughter and light. But even light cast shadows. On a blood-red evening, while the sky burned with sunset, Luffy stood on the deck of a captured ship, watching the horizon. He could feel it, the shift in the wind, the weight in the air, like the sea itself was holding its breath.
Behind him, Tashigi approached. Her uniform was torn, her sword drawn, but her voice was steady. "You've gone too far." He didn't turn. Maybe not far enough. "Luffy," she said, the name trembling on her tongue, "they've branded you an enemy of the world.
They're sending admirals after you." He smiled faintly. "Good. I was starting to feel lonely." "Why do this?" she demanded. "You could have been the greatest Marine in history." "I don't want to be great," he said softly. "I just want to be real." Tashigi's eyes burned. "And what about justice?" He turned then, and the sunset caught his smile, bright and terrible. "Justice?" he said. "Justice belongs to whoever's brave enough to rewrite it." He stepped past her, wind tugging at his coat. "Tell them I'm done wearing masks." The sails unfurled, the sea opened wide, and as his ship vanished into the horizon, the sky bled gold, the color of both dawn and ending. In the halls of Marie Joa, the alarm bells began to toll. Fleet Admiral Sengoku received the sealed order himself. Operation Seraphim. Capture or kill Lucius D. Luffy. Authorized by the 5 elders. Oversight, Imu. He stared at the paper for a long time. Then, with a weary hand, he folded it and set it aflame. They're not ready. Not for that boy. But the order was already spreading throughout the world. The hunt for the Laughing Dawn had begun.
And as the world's greatest forces moved to chain the light once more, the sea stirred, deep, ancient, remembering. For beneath the waves, in the places where even gods dare not look, something vast began to awaken. Something that had waited 800 years for the sound of that laughter. The sea whispered, "The sun has returned." The morning of reckoning came quiet, too quiet for a world about to break. The sea was a mirror, the wind absent. Ships stood still on open waters, their sails slack like breath held between heartbeats. And somewhere, amid that silence, the boy who had once worn white now sailed beneath no flag at all. The ship he captained was not a grand vessel. It was patched together from wrecks, stitched by rebellion and hope. Its mast bore no emblem of marine or pirate, only a single strip of crimson cloth fluttered in the wind, torn from the banner of the world government itself. A warning, a promise. On the deck, men and women worked with quiet resolve. Ex-Marines, freed slaves, exiled scholars, fishmen who bore scars from holy chains. They didn't call themselves a crew. They called themselves the Free Tide. And at their helm, Luffy stood, barefoot and smiling at the horizon as if it were an old friend he'd finally caught up to. The sea glowed golden around him, as though it too remembered who he was. Across the world, whispers carried like wind between waves. "He's defied Marie-Joie! He's destroyed Navy bases in the Calm Belt! He's liberated islands that no one dared name!" Every act of rebellion was an act of healing, a wound torn open by centuries of silence, now touched by dawn. But the government didn't see healing. It saw contagion. They declared him the most dangerous man alive. His bounty posted across every ocean read only, "Monkey D. Luffy, 3 billion berries, the Laughing Dawn." And beneath it, in smaller script, "Former Lieutenant of the Marines, execute on sight."
The symbol of justice had become the symbol of defiance. The boy in the ivory cage had become the sun beneath the flag. On that morning, as his ship cut through the Grand Line, a call reached them from the crow's nest. "3 Marine warships bearing down from the east!" Luffy didn't flinch. He tied the crimson cloth tighter to the mast, wind catching it like fire. "Then we'll greet them properly," he said, voice calm, light, deadly. The others readied themselves. The air hummed with fear and faith. And from the east, the fleet approached. 3 great ships, their sails marked with the kanji of justice, their decks gleaming with the armor of admirals. At their head stood Kizaru, light bending around him like mockery. Beside him,
Fujitora, his blind eyes calm beneath the storming sky. And at the center, in solemn silence, Admiral Aokiji, the man who had once believed in lazy justice, now forced to hunt its last true believer. When the ships halted in formation, Kizaru raised his hand. "Monkey D. Luffy," he called, his voice echoing across the waves. "You've caused quite a mess for a boy who used to salute the flag." Luffy grinned. "Then maybe it's time the flag stopped lying." The light around Kizaru sharpened. "Such a shame. You could have been a god in their new world." "I'd rather be a fool in my own." Before Kizaru could reply, Fujitora spoke softly. "Boy, I wish you'd never met me. Justice was never meant to bleed like this." Luffy looked at him, smiling sadly. Justice was never meant to obey. Aokiji's voice finally broke the silence, low and resigned. "Luffy, do you even know what you're fighting for anymore?" He paused. The wind stirred. The crimson cloth snapped. The battle began not with cannon fire, but with light, a blinding spear of Kizaru's power slicing through the clouds, striking the deck like a fallen sun. The free tide scattered, shouting, firing, but Luffy stood his ground. In that instant, something inside him awakened. Not anger, not hate, but the boundless energy of every soul that had ever dared to dream beyond their masters. He vanished. To the onlookers, it was as if the sea itself blinked. One moment, he was there. The next, he was a blur of heat and shadow, fist crashing into Kizaru's chest, light scattering like shattered glass. Kizaru coughed blood, something he hadn't done in years. "That's new." Luffy grinned, his hand still smoking. "I learned it from the sun." Above them, lightning forked. Waves rose like mountains. The battle of the heavens had begun. The sea became chaos. Kizaru's beams tore holes in the sky. Fujitora summoned storms of stone and gravity, while Aokiji froze the ocean in vast circles of frost. But everywhere they turned, Luffy was there, laughing, shouting, breaking the rhythm of their order. He didn't fight like a marine. He didn't fight like a pirate. He fought like a man with nothing left to lose except the right to choose. Each blow, and Fujitora's meteor fell, Luffy met it head-on, fist coated not in hockey, but in something stranger, light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The impact shattered the ice, the ships, the sky. For a moment, even the world seemed to stop spinning. And when the smoke cleared, he was still standing, bruised, bleeding, grinning. "You can't fight the world, boy," Fujitora said quietly.
"I'm not," Luffy answered. "I'm freeing it." The admirals withdrew that day, not defeated, but changed. They didn't report victory or failure. They said only, "The sun burns brighter than expected." The world's balance trembled. From the ruins of the Red Line to the skies above Skypiea, whispers rose like prayer. He's the storm that laughs. He's the will that forgot how to die. He's the sun the world tried to cage. And in the shadows beneath Maria Joie, Aimu watched through the still waters of the eternal pool, the mirror of all things. The shadow smiled faintly. "Then let the world see what happens," it whispered, "when the sun dares to touch the heavens." That night, as the free tide repaired their ship under a moonless sky, Luffy stood alone on the bow. His body ached. His knuckles bled. But his eyes, those wild, impossible eyes, still burned with laughter. The sea was quiet again. The stars scattered like memories across the dark. Behind him, one of his crew, the young scholar Nico Olwyn, a survivor of Ohara, approached quietly. "Captain, why do you keep fighting? You've already become what they fear." He smiled. "Because fear isn't the same as freedom." She hesitated. "Do you think we'll win?" Luffy turned his gaze toward the stars. "I don't think winning's the point. I think trying is."
And in his eyes, she saw something she'd only ever read about in the forbidden books of Ohara, the spark that could wake the world. The will of D. The night wind rose. Somewhere far beyond the horizon, an island called Raftel whispered through the tides, a song only the chosen could hear. And though Luffy didn't yet know the name, the sound made him smile. Because every sea, no matter how vast, how cruel, ends where laughter begins. Days bled into nights, and nights into something older, the kind of silence that comes before legends are written. The free tide drifted through the new world like a ghost of prophecy, passing islands that bowed not in fear, but in gratitude. Everywhere they went, the world stirred. Slaves vanished from the celestial convoys. Weapons meant for the Gorosei were sunk before they reached port. And in every whispering tavern, one name rose between breaths of awe and disbelief. Luffy. The boy who once saluted the world government now stood against it. The boy who once called justice his purpose now used that word like a blade against its masters. He had become the contradiction the world could no longer ignore. And the world, desperate, trembling, began to fracture. In the East Blue, the people of Husha village, who had never met him, began leaving small offerings by the sea. A straw hat drawn in the sand, a candle lit in a cracked mug, a simple note, "May the sea remember our sons." In Alabasta, Vivi read the secret message smuggled to her palace through the underground channels of the revolutionaries. The sun has risen beneath the flag. She understood. She smiled, tears catching the light like broken glass. In Water 7, Frankie's shipwright guild refused contracts from the Marines for the first time in history. If a man can build ships for chains, he can damn well build ships for freedom. And in a quiet bar in Shabandi, a certain red-haired pirate lifted his drink toward the horizon and said, "So, the world's caught fire again, huh? About time." But in Morijua, the fire was spreading too. Not of rebellion, but of fear. Cipher Pole's reports arrived daily, each one worse than the last. Ports burned, ships defected, admiral casualties unconfirmed. And at the center of every disaster was a single man who smiled through smoke and ruin. The 5 elders gathered again, their faces pale beneath the holy lights. "We should have erased him as a child," one hissed. Another shook his head. "Imu forbade it." "The people chant his name," a third whispered. "Even our soldiers. The spark is no longer his alone." And from the shadowed dais, Imu's voice drifted, soft as dying wind. "Then we'll turn their god into a weapon. Let them worship him as he destroys himself." That same night, on the deck of the Free Tide, the moon was full and trembling. The sea glowed pale, whispering secrets too old for words. Luffy sat alone, cross-legged, watching the reflection of the moon ripple in the waves. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Olwyn asked, approaching with cautious reverence. Luffy didn't answer. He was staring at his own reflection, and for the first time he didn't see a smile. He saw eyes that carried too many ghosts.
They say the moonlight is just sunlight lost at sea, Olwen murmured. Then maybe that's what I am, lost sunlight. She knelt beside him. You're not lost. The world just hasn't caught up yet. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. You sound like someone who still believes in destiny. I believe in choice, she said. He looked at her, really looked at her, and in that gaze was something both weary and eternal. Then promise me something, he said.
What? When I fall, make sure the sea takes me, not them. Owen didn't answer. She couldn't, because deep down she already knew. Every man who carried the will of deed died smiling into the storm. Weeks later, their ship approached a stretch of ocean shrouded in mist. No compasses worked there. No log poles could measure its rhythm. The locals called it the sea that sleeps. According to rumor, beneath its calm surface lay the wreckage of centuries, ancient warships, buried kingdoms, the bones of gods. Luffy called it beautiful. The crew called it insanity. Captain, their helmsman muttered, no one who sails through that fog ever comes back. Luffy grinned. Then no one's ever done it right. And with that, they sailed into oblivion. The mist swallowed them whole. Sound vanished. Time bent. The sea beneath them grew too still, like glass stretched over something vast and waiting. Then came the light. Soft, blue, breathing. The ocean floor below them shimmered, not with coral, but with symbols, ancient glyphs carved into stone, glowing faintly as the ship drifted above. Owen gasped, Captain, that's the same language from O'Hara's ruins. It's the voice of the sea. Luffy finished, eyes distant. He closed his eyes. The ship seemed to still. The crew felt something stir in their chests, a low, slow thrum, like the heartbeat of the world itself. And then they heard it too. A voice, not words, but song. Faint, but clear. Sad, but alive. It was the sea singing. Luffy's lips moved with it. They called it Joy Boy, he whispered. The one who promised laughter to the end of the world. Owen stared, breath trembling. How do you know that name? He opened his eyes. They were brighter than dawn. Because he's still here. The glyphs pulsed once more, then dimmed. The fog broke apart. The ship emerged into light. And before them stretched an island that shouldn't exist. An island not on any chart, ringed with golden mist and shaped like a tear. At its center stood a single tree, its roots reaching into the sea, its leaves shimmering with light that wasn't sunlight at all. Luffy smiled. Guess we found where the world hid its heart. Owen whispered, the Tree of Dawn? Luffy laughed softly. Nah, just another adventure. But even as he said it, he could feel the weight of destiny pressing close, the same warmth that once flowed through the veins of kings and fools alike. And somewhere, far above, in the holy city, Imu's eyes opened. The shadow spoke, voice trembling with the light. So, he's found it. The wind changed. The sea stirred. The last act was about to begin. The sun had found its reflection, and the world, for the first time in 800 years, began to wake. The island's air felt heavy, ancient, like a dream half remembered. Each step Luffy took sank softly into the sand, yet it was as though the ground itself recognized him, welcoming, trembling. The sea lapped at the shore in quiet reverence, and for once, even the ever-restless wind stood still. The free tide anchored offshore. None of the crew spoke. There was a stillness that felt sacred, the hush of a secret not yet ready for the world. Luffy walked toward the great tree at the island's center, its roots curling through stone and coral, veins of gold light pulsing faintly beneath the bark. Owen followed behind, whispering in awe, "These symbols,
They're the same as those carved into the poneglyphs, but this is older. Luffy brushed his hand across the trunk. The light responded, spreading up his arm, across his chest, humming with recognition. He didn't flinch. He only smiled. "The sea remembers," he murmured. The ground shifted. The ocean stirred around them, forming gentle whirlpools that spiraled outward like the turning of time. The crew shouted from the ship, but Luffy raised a hand, calming them. "It's okay. It's waking up." From the base of the tree came a voice, soft, echoing, neither man nor woman, but something vast. "You carry the will." Luffy froze. "Who are you?" "The memory of what was lost." Alwyn fell to her knees, clutching her head as the sound filled the air like thunder beneath the skin. Images flickered through their minds. Ancient cities swallowed by tides, moons shattering, laughter echoing across forgotten ages. Luffy saw flashes, a man in chains smiling beneath the gallows, a woman crying over a map of the world, a straw hat resting atop a stone throne. 800 years we waited for the sun to rise again. The light they feared would return.
Luffy's eyes widened. "Joy Boy." The voice softened. "He was the beginning. You are the echo." He shook his head. "No, I'm me. And that is enough." The golden light surged through the tree, arcing into the sky. The clouds above split open, revealing a sun burning brighter than any had seen, not the light of day, but of remembrance. Everywhere across the world, those who bore the will of D felt it, a pulse in their chests, a whisper in their blood. The revolutionaries paused mid-march. Fishermen at sea looked up. In distant prisons, nameless men smiled through their chains. The world's forgotten laughter had returned. From the heavens above, the world government's response came swiftly. Fleet after fleet of warships broke from Marie Joie, their sails black as judgment. At their center sailed the Ark of Justice, an enormous vessel carved with celestial sigils, its cannons powered by the same light that had once destroyed Ohara. And upon its bow stood Imu, not shadow now, not rumor, real and terrible. The figure was tall, cloaked in white flame, eyes like twin eclipses. When they spoke, the sky dimmed. "The sun has risen without permission," Imu said, "and now the heavens must be cleansed." The crew of the Free Tide watched in stunned silence as the horizon darkened with the approach of the divine fleet. Alwyn turned to Luffy, fear trembling through her words. "Captain, that's the end of the world coming for us." He smiled, soft and calm. "Then it's a good day for a fight."
She gripped his arm. "You can't. This is suicide." "Maybe," he said, eyes fixed on the burning horizon. "But if I don't stand now, I'll live forever as their mistake. And I don't want forever." He stepped forward, hand brushing the crimson cloth tied to the mast, once a symbol of rebellion, now a banner of hope. "Raise it," he said. "Let the world see the color of its dawn." The Free Tide's flag unfurled, glowing red and gold against the darkness, and for the first time in history, the sea itself seemed to cheer. The battle began with light. The Ark of Justice unleashed beams of blinding energy that carved through waves and cloud alike. Islands shattered, the air turned molten. The crew fought fiercely, but against gods, mortals are only moments. Luffy leapt from the deck into the sky, his body blazing with haki so dense it cracked the air.
He met the beams head-on, his fist breaking light itself into fragments that rained down as shimmering rain. Imu descended, stepping across the air as though it were marble. "You are the flaw in eternity," they said. Luffy laughed, blood in his teeth. Then eternity needed breaking. They clashed. The world screamed. Every impact tore the sea apart, waves rising miles high, lightning blooming like flowers of death. The air filled with echoes of all that ever lived and loved and dreamed. Imu struck with the fury of the heavens. Luffy answered with the laughter of mankind. When the dust cleared, both stood trembling, the sea boiling beneath them. "You can't win," Imu whispered. "You'll die, and the world will forget you."
Luffy smiled. "Then I'll make sure the sea remembers." He raised his hand. Light, not Imu's divine light, but warm, human, defiant, burst from his body, spreading outward until it touched every horizon. Across the world, dawn came early. When the light faded, the island was gone. The fleet was gone. The free tide was shattered, its fragments scattered across the waves like seeds. And in the center of the endless calm, only the great tree remained, burned, but alive, its roots glowing faintly beneath the sea. Olwen awoke on a drifting plank, the sun breaking over her face. She looked around, heart aching with the quiet. No ship, no captain, just waves. And then she heard it, soft, like wind over glass. Laughter. The kind of laughter that feels like remembering a dream you never had. She turned toward the horizon, tears blurring her vision, and whispered, "You kept your promise." The sea shimmered. Far above, in the holy city that no longer looked quite so holy, the 5 elders stood in silence. The eternal pool that once reflected only Imu's light now mirrored a different glow, warm, gold, unyielding. "The sun," one murmured, "it didn't die." And from somewhere deep below the marble floors, something answered. "The sun never dies. It only sets to rise again." The world would call it a myth, the day the heavens fell and the sea sang. But the fishermen who sailed that dawn swore they saw something glowing beneath the waves, drifting toward the horizon. A boy, smiling, barefoot, carrying the laughter of the world in his hands. And the sea, ancient and endless, whispered back, "The world forgot his name, but I did not." The world was quiet for 3 days after the fall of the sun. Not a storm moved, not a tide rose, even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if the sea itself was deciding whether to grieve or to rejoice. But on the 4th day, the day the sea began to stir again, the world awoke, screaming. The island where the sun had burned was gone, swallowed by waves and myth, yet its echo rippled across the world. Ships that had sunk centuries ago rose briefly to the surface, as though the ocean exhaled their ghosts. Islands once hidden reappeared, the fogs around them burned away. The sky shimmered with unfamiliar constellations, new stars born from the light that had shattered Marijoi's silence. The balance had been broken, and somewhere deep within that chaos, something older than gods began to move. In the ruins of Marijois, the 5 elders gathered once more. The once perfect city now bore cracks through its marble heart, fissures that glowed faintly from beneath, pulsing like veins. The throne of Imu stood empty, its white fire extinguished. "Impossible," one whispered. He was erased, the island, the boy, gone, and yet the seas still burn with his memory.
Another elder stared into the cracked floor, his voice trembling. The light remains. Even gods cannot kill laughter. The eldest among them, his robe tattered, his eyes hollow, raised his head. Then we will give the world something to fear again. If the sun has risen, we shall summon the night.
And thus began Operation Eclipse. Across the world, the celestial remnants unleashed weapons of a forgotten age, machines pulled from the ruins of the Void Century, powered by fragments of the same energy that once drove the ancient weapons themselves. They were called Seraphim chains, vast, living constructs of metal and will, each bound to the bloodline of the gods. They did not burn, they consumed. Entire seas vanished under their shadow. Islands turned to glass. The sky filled with smoke that refused to disperse. The world cried out for a savior, but the one they had called the sun was gone. Or so they thought. In the new world, on the edge of a storm no compass could survive, a small crew drifted aboard a half-sunk ship, a ragged handful of survivors of the free tide. Among them was Olwen, her hands blistered, her eyes dim from sleepless nights. "Any sign of him?" a voice croaked from the deck below. She shook her head. "The sea keeps her secrets." A silence fell. Then, from beneath the waves, a sound rose, soft, rhythmic, familiar. A heartbeat. Olwen froze. "Do you hear that?" The crew leaned over the railing, peering into the depths. A glow pulsed faintly below, growing brighter, rising closer. The water began to boil. And then he broke the surface. Luffy gasped air like a newborn star returning to life. His chest heaved, his skin scorched by light. But his eyes, oh, those eyes, burned brighter than ever. The crew erupted in cries of disbelief, laughter, tears. "Captain!" He smiled weakly. "Told you I'd let the sea catch me." They hauled him aboard, and though his body trembled with exhaustion, he laughed. A laugh so bright that even the thunder above seemed to soften in its echo. The next morning, the sky turned black. The Seraphim chains had reached the Grand Line. From the deck, Luffy and his crew watched as the horizon darkened, not from storm, but from shadow. A machine the size of an island moved through the water, its limbs like mountains, its face carved with the sigil of the world government. Chains of light trailed behind it, linking to others far beyond sight. "It's feeding on the sea," Olwen whispered. It's draining the world." Luffy stood, steady despite the trembling deck. "Then we break the chains." The battle that followed was not one of men and guns, but of wills and gods. As the free tide charged toward the colossal machine, waves rose high enough to scrape the clouds. The creature turned, its eyes burning with artificial divinity. A voice thundered from it, deep, mechanical, echoing every celestial voice that had ever declared itself divine. "The sea belongs to the heavens." Luffy's laughter rang back. "Not anymore." He launched himself into the sky, fist wrapped in flame and light. The impact shook the air, shattered the construct's mask, revealing beneath it, not metal, but flesh. A human face. A face that looked eerily like his own. He hesitated. "What are you?" The creature spoke, its voice fractured but mournful. "We are what they made of you, the obedient sun, the caged dawn." For a heartbeat, time froze, and then the creature smiled, a broken, desperate mirror of his grin. "Set us free." Luffy's eyes softened. "All right."
He drew back his fist, haki blazing black and gold, and struck with all the mercy the world had forgotten. The explosion split the horizon. The machine fell, its chains shattering into 1,000 fragments that rained across the sea like falling stars. The free tide wept, not for victory, but for the sound that came after, the first true silence the world had heard in centuries. But their victory was short-lived. For every chain broken, 2 more rose. Each sea now burned with the light of heaven's fury. And in the distance, beyond storms and ruin, a voice whispered across the currents, cold and familiar. "Lucius, you have learned to fight. Now learn to fall." Luffy turned toward the sound, the wind tangling his hair, the horizon burning like judgment. "Imu," he said quietly, "you still haven't learned to listen." That night, as the world bled light into darkness, Luffy gathered his crew. They sat around the remnants of a fire, the sea glowing faintly beneath the stars. Olwen leaned forward. "Captain, if we keep fighting, there'll be nothing left to save."
He smiled gently. "Then we'll make something new." "But the world's too broken." Luffy looked out at the horizon, his voice soft but steady. "Then we'll build a world that doesn't need saving." His words hung in the air like prayer. The fire crackled, the waves whispered, and far away, where the sky met the sea, lightning began to bloom again, golden, vast, unstoppable. The war of heaven's chains had begun. The war spread like fire across every corner of the sea. The Grand Line became a crucible, a scar that glowed from horizon to horizon. Islands vanished beneath waves of divine light, and in their place rose fragments of ancient machinery, each tethered to the other by lines of shimmering energy. The seraphim chains were not merely weapons. They were a network, a living system of control designed to bind the world's very heartbeat. And at the center of that growing storm, the shadow of Imu watched from the hollow sky. "The sea forgets," the voice whispered to itself, "but I do not." Below, humanity fractured. The Marines splintered into 2 factions, those who obeyed the world government's divine orders and those who followed the rogue admirals, Kizaru, Aokiji, and Fujitora, who had turned against the throne. Pirate crews joined with revolutionaries, forming fleeting alliances that burned bright and brief. And in the chaos of it all, the name Luffy was no longer whispered, it was shouted like a prayer or a challenge. The world was no longer divided between pirate and marine. It was divided between those who knelt and those who stood. In the midst of that chaos, the free tide sailed through seas that were no longer seas. Lightning and black flame fell from the sky in spiraling columns. The water hissed where it touched, boiling into steam. Each time a new seraphim chain rose from the deep, Luffy met it head-on. His body wrapped in that same golden light the world had begun to call the Flame of Dawn.
The crew followed him through storm and ruin, no longer out of duty but devotion. He no longer needed to give orders. His laughter was enough. One evening, as the ship drifted between the shattered peaks of what had once been Sabaudi, Olwen stood at the bow, watching the ruins slip beneath the water. The air smelled of ozone and memory. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, "even in ruin." Luffy joined her, hands tucked behind his head, eyes on the fading horizon. "Yeah, the world's prettier when it's honest." She turned to him. "Do you ever wish you'd stayed their hero?" He thought for a long while, then shook his head. "Heroes die too easy. I'd rather live as a fool who never stopped trying." Olwen smiled faintly. "Then we'll follow you, fool or not." He looked at her, that same bright, boyish grin that had once lit up the halls of Marie Joie. "That's all I need."
Suddenly, the sea around them began to churn. From the depths rose another seraphim, but this one was different. It was smaller, humanoid, its face hidden beneath a mirrored mask. Its body was made not of steel, but of light, shifting like water in sunlight. The crew scrambled to arms, but Luffy held up a hand. Wait. The creature spoke, its voice soft, familiar, almost human. You are Lucius D. Luffy. You were not meant to awaken. He tilted his head. You talk too much for a machine. The creature hesitated, as though confused by his tone. I am Seraphim Model Alpha. I was built from your image.
The crew murmured in disbelief. Built? From him? Olwen asked. The creature's eyes glowed faintly beneath the mask. They took your blood, your cells, your dreams. You are the prototype of all chains. Luffy went still. For the first time in a long time, silence replaced his grin. So that's what they saw in me, he said quietly. A weapon that laughs. The seraphim extended a hand. Return with me. End this. The world cannot survive another dawn. Luffy looked down at the hand, then smiled. Slow, sad, resolute. I already tried ending the world once. Didn't like how it felt. And in one breath he struck. The impact shattered the sky. The creature's mask cracked, and behind it was not a face, but a reflection of his own, flickering like memory in broken glass. Then we'll end together, it whispered. I'd rather you live, he replied. And with one final blow, he broke the mirror. The seraphim dissolved into light, scattering across the sea like dust from a shattered star. For a moment, the waves glowed gold. Then they dimmed. Luffy stood in the silence, eyes lowered. I'm not fighting them anymore. I'm fighting what they made me. Olwen placed a hand on his arm. Then let's unmake it. He looked at her and nodded. Yeah, he said softly. Let's free everything.
That night, they found refuge in the shadow of an ancient ruin, a colossal half-sunken temple carved with symbols of the sun. Within its broken halls, they discovered something that made even Luffy fall silent. A mural spanning an entire wall, depicting the sea itself rising to devour a shining city in the sky. At the mural's center was a figure, faceless, laughing, holding a straw hat. Olwen ran her fingers across the inscription at its base. It's written in the old tongue, she said. It says, when the sun dances, heaven shall fall. Luffy laughed softly. Guess that's me again. She looked at him, half smiling, half trembling. Do you ever wonder why you were chosen? He shrugged. I wasn't. I just didn't stop walking. The next morning, they set sail again, toward the final link in the Seraphim chain. Every sea, every storm, every whisper of wind seemed to point in one direction, upward. Because the final chain didn't rest in the ocean, it was above it. The last fortress of the world government, Elysium. A floating citadel built on the ruins of the ancient kingdom's heart, anchored to the sky by the blood of slaves and the bones of kings. And there, waiting like a patient god, was Imu. When the free tide finally pierced the clouds, the sight before them was otherworldly. The citadel gleamed like the skeleton of the moon, towers of glass and light suspended above a vortex of eternal storm. The air hummed with energy so dense it distorted sound. Luffy grinned, eyes wide. So that's heaven, huh? Owen stared in awe, more like a prison pretending to be paradise. He stretched his arms, then let's break it open.
The ship rose higher, carried by wind and will. The crew looked up at the city of gods, fear and wonder battling in their eyes. And at their helm, their captain stood, a man once molded by the world, now ready to remake it. The chains of heaven awaited. The war was about to find its sky. The ascent to Elysium was like rising through the memory of light itself. Clouds burned gold beneath them. The air thinned until each breath felt like swallowing fire. And the thunder above no longer sounded like weather. It sounded like voices. The cries of the ancient, the prayers of the forgotten, the laughter of those who had once dared to dream. It was as if every soul the world had ever silenced was calling to him now. Luffy gripped the ship's railing, the wind tearing at his coat, his eyes fixed on the glowing citadel that hung above like a wound in the sky. "Almost there," he murmured. The crew stood behind him in solemn silence. None spoke, because none could. The closer they came to Elysium, the more the air trembled with the hum of divinity, a vibration that clawed at the bones, that whispered obedience into every heartbeat. Even Olwen faltered, clutching her chest. "It's pulling me," she gasped, "like gravity, but inside." Luffy reached back and steadied her. His touch was warm, grounding. "Then hold on," he said, voice as steady as the sea. "Don't let heaven tell you who you are." And with that, they breached the final cloud. Elysium unfolded before them, an impossible city suspended between storm and sun. Towers of crystal spiraled upward, each inscribed with prayers in the ancient tongue. Bridges of light connected platforms of marble, and at the center of it all rose a massive circular structure, the Throne of Radiance. It was from there that the seraphim chains extended, lines of energy connecting sky to sea, order to submission. And seated upon that throne was Imu. Their form was neither human nor god, a being of shifting light, their face hidden by a mask of serenity. The air around them shimmered like heat. When they spoke, the sound wasn't heard, it was felt. "You've come home, child." Luffy's eyes narrowed. "Home doesn't need chains. Freedom without order is nothing but madness." He laughed softly. "Then maybe I'm mad enough to be free." The air split with soundless laughter. Imu rose from the throne, each step fracturing the light beneath their feet. "You were meant to be my vessel, a sun that never set, a symbol that never disobeyed." Luffy tilted his head, grinning. "Guess I cracked the mold." "You cracked the world." "Good." And with that single word, he leapt. The battle that followed was not one of fists and steel, but of will and meaning. Every strike tore holes in the air. Every breath carried the weight of centuries. Imu moved like a storm given flesh, their blows soundless yet infinite, bending space itself. Luffy answered with laughter, every motion wild, fluid, alive. When Imu's blade of light cleaved through the air, Luffy caught it bare-handed, haki sparking gold and crimson. The impact shattered the platform beneath them, sending waves of light cascading into the abyss below. "You fight like a god," Imu said. He grinned. "Nah, I fight like a man who's not afraid to lose." Imu's voice turned cold. "And that is why you must die."
They thrust their hand forward, and the seraphim chains ignited. Beams of light surged upward from the seas below, converging on the throne, rivers of divine power returning to their source. The entire world trembled. Olwen and the crew could only watch from the ship as the sky itself began to collapse. "Captain!" she screamed. "If you fight here, you'll tear everything apart!" He looked back, just once, and smiled that same smile that had carried her through every storm. "Then the world will have to learn to start over." He charged again. This time, his body blazed with the warmth of dawn, not the violent fire of gods, but the steady glow of life. His heartbeat thundered through the air, syncing with the rhythm of the world. Each pulse broke a chain. Each laugh tore through a lie. The sky cracked open. Emu staggered. "You can't. You are me." Luffy shook his head. "No, you're what happens when laughter forgets how to breathe." He drew back his fist, the same fist that had shattered his cage, the same that had once reached toward the horizon as a boy who knew nothing but dreams, and he struck. The blow didn't just hit Emu. It hit the world itself. Light exploded. Sound vanished. For a single, endless heartbeat, everything was still. When the light cleared, Elysium was gone.
The citadel had fallen, dissolving into rain that shimmered like gold dust. The seraphim chains had snapped. The sky above was no longer divine. It was blue, ordinary, beautiful. The free tide floated among the clouds, silent, waiting. And there, standing at the bow, was Luffy. His coat was torn. His hair whipped wild in the wind. His body trembled, fading at the edges like sunlight dissolving into dusk. Olwen ran forward. "Captain!" He turned, smiling. "Hey, looks like we won." "You're fading," she said, tears in her voice. "Guess the world doesn't need me anymore," he said softly. She shook her head, gripping his hand. "It always will." He looked past her, toward the sea far below, vast, endless, free. "Nah, it just needs to remember." And as his body began to dissolve into light, he whispered something only the wind could hear. "Tell the sea I kept my promise." The last thing they saw was his smile, bright as the dawn he'd fought for. Then he was gone. The rain fell for 7 days and 7 nights, and when it stopped, the world was new. The celestial dragons had vanished. The Marines rebuilt not as enforcers, but as protectors. The revolutionaries laid down their arms, and on every island, from Fuchsia to Fishman Island, children looked to the sea and laughed. Because the waves had begun to sing again. A quiet song. A memory in motion. The echo of a boy who had once defied the heavens just to see the sun rise free. The sea whispered his name with every tide. Not as legend, not as God, but as truth. The world forgot him. The sea did not. The sea was calm again. Calm in that way that makes you wonder if it remembers everything it's seen. It carried no trace of the war, no sign of the light that had once split the heavens, only the soft rhythm of waves against forgotten shores. Steady, eternal, whispering names the wind no longer dared to speak. Some said the sun had died that day. Others said it had simply gone home. But the sea knew better. It remembered the laughter that had once echoed across its tides. It remembered the warmth that could not be killed. And so, every dawn since that war, when the first light touched the water, the sea rippled, as if bowing in memory. Olwen woke to that sound. She lived now on a small island deep in the New World, one of the few untouched by war. The land was green, the sky clear, the wind gentle. She kept no maps, no weapons, no flags, only a journal, worn, water-stained, filled with pages of sketches and words that refused to fade. Every morning she would walk to the cliff by the sea, open that journal, and write what she remembered. Not history, memory, because the world had already written its history, and in that version, the man who had saved it was never born. The official record said the Seraphim uprising ended when the Elysium reactor collapsed, that the destruction of Marijor had been caused by a natural disaster, that the Lucius Project was an abandoned experiment, erased for the sake of peace. But Olwen had seen his smile. She'd heard his laugh. She'd held his hand as the world came apart and rebuilt itself again, and she refused to let the sea remember alone. That morning, as she wrote, a familiar rhythm reached her ears, soft footsteps through the grass. A boy appeared, no older than 10, barefoot and grinning with the kind of reckless joy she'd almost forgotten. He carried something in his hands, a small conch shell that shimmered faintly with light. "Miss Olwen," he shouted, holding it up, "the sea's talking again." I smiled gently. "The sea always talks. You just have to listen right." "No, really," he insisted, pressing it to his ear. "It's laughing." I froze. My heart skipped. "Laughing?" she whispered. The boy nodded. Like when you tell stories by the fire. Like someone happy."
She reached out, her hand trembling, and took the shell. It was warm, impossibly warm, and inside it, faint and distant, was the unmistakable sound of laughter. Wild, free, alive. Her eyes filled with tears. "Welcome back," she whispered. That evening, the horizon burned gold. The villagers gathered on the shore as the water began to glow, soft at first, then brighter, until the entire sea shimmered with light. Children pointed, shouting that the ocean was smiling. Fishermen fell to their knees. Even the wind seemed to hum with quiet joy. Owen stood apart, watching, her heart aching with something between grief and grace. From beneath the waves, a faint figure shimmered. Not solid, not spirit, but memory made manifest. Barefoot, grinning, with the sun reflected in his eyes. The children gasped. Owen smiled through her tears. "You really can't sit still, can you?" The figure turned toward her, as though he'd heard. And then, for a heartbeat, the entire sea laughed. Not cruel, not mocking, just joyous. The kind of laughter that feels like the world remembering how to breathe. Word spread fast. Across islands, across seas, across generations. The laughter of the ocean. They called it the dawn current.
Sailors claimed it guided lost ships to safe shores. Fishermen swore it calmed storms. And some said that if you listened closely at sunrise, you could hear a voice whisper, "I kept my promise." The world moved on. Empires rebuilt. Flags changed. The Marines became protectors again. Pirates became wanderers of freedom rather than conquest. The revolutionaries faded into myth. But every man, woman, and child, no matter how young, knew one truth that no law could erase. The sea remembers. Years passed, decades perhaps. The lines between story and scripture blurred. Some called him a god, some a ghost. Some said he was just a man who dared to smile at heaven and made it blush. But for Olwen, old now, hair silver, eyes soft, he was none of those things. He was a friend, a fool, a boy who once believed the world could be kind and made it so just long enough for others to believe too. On her final morning, she sat again by the sea, journal open on her lap. The tide crept close, foam brushing her feet like an old friend's greeting. She whispered, "I'm tired, Captain." The wind stirred, the waves answered with a gentle hum, low, rhythmic, familiar. She smiled faintly. "Yeah, I know. You'll take care of it." And as she closed her eyes, the sea shimmered once more, brighter than before. When the villagers found her, she was smiling. The journal lay open, its last page blank, except for 3 words written in golden ink. The sun lives. That night, under a sky blooming with stars,
A boy stood on that same cliff, the same one Olwen had once walked. In his hand was her journal, and in his eyes burned that same impossible fire.